Everyone I knew followed a predictable route: high school, a short stint in college, and then a job. My work wasn't exciting, but I appreciated the sense of duty it gave me. I was diligent, saved my earnings, and lived a quiet, unassuming life. Romance and relationships weren't high on my agenda. I assumed they'd come along eventually. Then I met Laura. She was a force of nature, driven by a purpose that extended beyond everyday concerns. We connected through our jobs, and casual lunch breaks soon evolved into something more. Laura's ambition captivated me, although I didn't foresee how completely it would consume her. I was born Leslie, a name that never resonated with me, so at 18, I legally changed it to Jacob Wagner. For 7 years, I lived comfortably as Jacob, secure in my new identity. Life took a dramatic turn when I met Laura Elizabeth Keyes at a work training seminar. She possessed an almost regal air, and I was instantly smitten. Other men were drawn to her as well, but I was the first to ask her out. She politely declined, as she did with everyone, which only fueled my resolve. On the final day of training, she handed out her business card, suggesting we contact her with any questions. I waited until Monday to call, leaving a message. "What problem do I need to invent to get you to go on a date with me?" She returned my call the next day, and after some lighthearted back and forth, we agreed to an evening meeting instead of lunch. That's how it all started. We dined together every evening for the rest of the week, a pattern that continued for 5 more weeks. We never had lunch because she trained from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. daily, either running, swimming, or cycling in preparation for the Ironman competition. The Ironman entailed a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and a full 26.2-mile marathon, all to be completed within 17 hours. Laura was a vegan, so our meals consisted primarily of quinoa, kale, tofu, and other plant-based fare. It took some time for my palate to adapt to her dietary preferences. We first became intimate at her house, which resembled a gym more than a home, furnished with rubber balls and weight benches. Her bed was firm, but our physical connection was intense and only deepened with time. We were close whenever our schedules allowed. 14 months after our first encounter, we were married. She paused her training for our honeymoon, but resumed immediately afterward. One evening, she announced her desire to compete in the Wisconsin Ironman, her first at that level, and declared she'd need to train even harder. I couldn't fathom how she could train more intensely than she already did, but she was unwavering. I was apprehensive, as her current regimen was demanding, and preparing for an Ironman would double her time commitment. Soon, our expenses began to rise. About 4 months into her intensified training, she announced the need for a coach. Her gym had a trainer with Ironman experience, but he was costly. The first thing he did was persuade her to quit her job and devote herself to training full-time, a decision she made without consulting me. The loss of her income put a strain on our finances. She already owned a good bicycle, but her coach insisted on more, one for competition, one for training, and even a spare. She ended up with 4 bicycles, collectively costing as much as my truck. Time went by, and I decided it was time to meet Laura's trainer. I went to the gym, already familiar with his name, Jason Hendrick, as I'd been writing him checks every week. I observed him standing over Laura as she lifted weights. After watching them for a while, they moved on to another exercise involving pulling weighted ropes from the wall. Laura stood with her back to the wall, gripping the ropes, and Hendrick stood very close, facing her. I watched as he ran his hands along her arms and then cued her chest while speaking to her. "Why are you touching my wife's breasts?" I demanded, startling them both. Jacob, what are you doing here?" Laura asked. "I thought it was time to meet Mr. Hendrick," I replied. He extended his hand for a handshake, which I ignored. "You have no right to touch her like that," I stated. "I can't train her properly without it," he retorted. "You need to touch her breast to train her?" "What kind of training is this?" I questioned. "It's part of my method," he explained. "Then we'll find someone else." "You're fired," I declared. "Laura, I'll see you at home." I walked out, and she followed shortly after, furious. You can't fire him for doing his job, she argued. He was fondling your breasts, and you let him, I countered. He was assessing my muscle mass. That's absurd, I said, laughing. He was fondling your breasts, and you stood there smiling. He's fired. I need him, she insisted. Then you can keep him, but I won't pay for it, or any of your training. She glared at me. I'll get a job, but he stays. I paused before asking, how important is he to you? Very important, she answered. And me? Where do I rank on your list of priorities? She didn't respond directly, but her silence and defiant posture spoke volumes. I understood where I stood. I sat for several minutes, bewildered. It was clear she had made her choice, which simplified mine. I went to my computer and began researching how to handle family issues. I decided to act preemptively. I wasn't going to let that man get another cent of my money. If she wanted to pay him, she could do so with her own funds. Before we married, I had a fifth-wheel trailer I used during college summers. Laura and I had taken it to the mountains for her training, as she preferred biking and running on inclines. I went upstairs and she was in the bathroom talking to someone. I only heard, "See you tomorrow." I gathered some clothes and moved them to the trailer. On my second trip, I heard the bathtub running, knowing she'd be occupied for at least an hour. After several trips, I packed my computer and other belongings. I spent the night in the office parking lot. The next day, I explained the situation to my boss. When he inquired about my plans, I admitted I didn't have any yet. That evening, I returned home to retrieve more belongings. Laura was eating a kale salad as I gathered files in our office. "Where did you go last night?" she asked. "I stayed at the plant," I replied. "Did you bring Hendrik over to evaluate you again?" "No, it wasn't necessary," she answered. "Would it have been true?" I pressed. "No." After a pause, she asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I stated. "Why?" "Because you made it clear yesterday that he's more important than me. I need him to do well in Wisconsin. No other coach can help me like he does." "I saw how well you two work," I said, making air quotes. "He touches you and you smile." "He didn't fondle me." I shook my head. "We were a good team once. We could be again. Just give me a chance." "Will you give him up as a coach?" She shook her head. "Then I'm leaving." I packed my things and headed for the door. "When will you be back?" "That's up to you. Tell me he's gone and I'll stay. If not, I'm leaving for good." Without hesitation, she said, "He's staying." One of us was being selfish. Or perhaps both of us. I wanted a wife. She wanted to compete. It took 3 trips to load the remainder of my possessions into my truck, and she watched each time. On my final trip, she asked, "Where are you going?" "I don't know." "When will you be back?" "We've already discussed this." "I'm not coming back." "Jacob, you can't do this just because of my coach. And you can't choose a coach over me, but it seems like you are." I withdrew half of our joint funds, canceled her credit cards, and disconnected her phone service. I reminded her that bills were due and advised her to find employment soon to avoid financial difficulty. I grabbed her competition and spare bikes from the garage, threw them in my truck, and drove off as she protested, "You can't take them. I paid for them." I replied, "And I paid for them," and drove away. She didn't appear to care about my departure, but the loss of the bicycles distressed her. The following morning I drove past the gym and saw her crying while Hendrik held her hands. I couldn't tell if her tears were for the end of our marriage or the loss of her bikes. I took the next day off to locate a place for my trailer and got settled. Later, I recounted everything to my parents. My mom asked if I was okay, and my dad asked if I needed money. I answered yes to the first question and no to the second. Laura and I didn't communicate for 2 weeks until she called and left a message. I returned her call. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "Are you still training with Hendrik?" "Yes, I need him." "Then we're getting a divorce." "You can't be serious. Have you slept with him?" "How could you ask that?" "Simple question." "Have you?" She hung up. The next day, my boss offered me a position in Leadville, Colorado, and I departed the following day. 2 months passed, and autumn arrived in Colorado. With winter approaching, a small trailer wasn't suitable, so I rented an apartment and furnished it with inexpensive used furniture. After living in a trailer, the extra space felt strange. My family invited me home for Thanksgiving, and I accepted. By then, I had returned to my regular diet. No more quinoa, kale, or tofu. Thanksgiving with my family was enjoyable, and no one mentioned Laura. The day after Thanksgiving, I started back to Leadville. While refueling my truck, I encountered an old friend, Zeke. We caught up, and he mentioned seeing Laura with a muscular man, likely Hendrik, at a coffee shop. Zeke described witnessing them holding hands and kissing in public. While we talked, Zeke's brother called. During the call, Zeke learned that Laura and Hendrik were staying at the EMS motel. He suggested we investigate before I left town. We drove to the motel, and I parked in a distant corner. Zeke's brother, who worked there, assured us there were no functioning security cameras, so we didn't need to worry about being seen. He also mentioned that Laura and Hendrik stayed there weekly because Hendrik was married and couldn't bring her to his home. Since his wife was away for Thanksgiving, they had been there for 2 days. Zeke asked his brother for their room key, assuring him we'd return it quickly. Mem handed it over without hesitation. The motel still used traditional keys instead of electronic ones. Zeke and I went to their room, and it was evident someone had recently been intimate there. "Okay, Jacob, it's up to you now. I'll take pictures from outside, and you take them inside," Zeke said. "Are you sure Mem won't get in trouble?" I asked. "He owns the place. He's fine. Just do your part and I'll do mine. Just do your part." The room was on the second floor, overlooking a construction site. The balcony door was broken and wouldn't lock. I went downstairs to ask Mem for a ladder, and he directed me to his shed. I retrieved a ladder, tested it, and then returned to my truck to wait. About half an hour later, Zeke called to say they had returned. It was dark by then. I watched for the room's light to come on. When they didn't close the curtains, I quietly ascended the stairs and began taking photographs as they undressed. When they glanced towards the balcony, I ducked out of sight. Laura never had intimacy without showering first, so they went to the bathroom, leaving the door open. However, the shower was built into the wall, obscuring their view of the balcony. I quickly packed all their clothes into 2 travel suitcases. I grabbed everything hanging on the clothes rack by the bathroom and tossed it onto the balcony. I checked the bathroom for any forgotten items, even crawling inside to make sure. All the towels, washcloths, and the bath mat went into the suitcases. I could hear them talking in the shower but couldn't decipher their words. I knew they couldn't see me because of the shower curtain. I threw everything, including the bed linens, off the balcony and went downstairs to load it all into my truck. The occupants of the room below watched me, but when I put my finger to my lips, miming locking my mouth, they nodded in agreement, signaling they'd stay silent. They were likely cheating too, so they had no reason to say anything. I met Zeke and Mem at the front desk, giving Mem the bed linens. The brothers laughed as Mem started printing the photos Zeke had taken. Time was short, even if Laura and Hendrik took a quick shower. Mem had just begun printing my photos when the front desk phone rang. He winked at us when he saw the caller ID. "Reception desk," Mem answered. After a pause, he said, "Are you saying the ladder is still there? I'll send extra towels and bedding, but I can't help with your clothes. I'll call the police." Pause. "No police?" "Okay, but all I can offer is towels." Pause. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." He hung up, and we burst into laughter. I asked if I could deliver the towels myself, which made them laugh even harder. Mem handed me a fresh pack of towels and sheets. I went upstairs, knocked on their door, and called out, "Room service." Hendrik cracked the door open. "I'll take them," he said, but I pushed past him. Laura stood there, dripping wet and attempting to cover herself. They didn't recognize me until I tossed the towels to Laura. She screamed and grabbed a sheet. "I saw everything, Laura. No need to hide." "Maybe your trainer should pay more attention to your pecs," I said, laughing. Hendrik stood naked in the middle of the room, looking confused. His upper body was impressive, but the rest wasn't, and I laughed harder. Don't bother, Laura. I'll be in town long enough to file for divorce. Good luck in Wisconsin. Jacob, please, she began, but I walked out, leaving the door open. Hendrik didn't move the entire time. Laura tried calling me, leaving messages from both her phone and the motels. In her messages, she claimed I had abandoned her and that she needed Hendrik, first for training, then for emotional support. I stayed in town for 2 days to initiate the divorce proceedings. While sorting through the clothes I took from their room, I discovered Hendrik's wallet, keys, phone, and a small black notebook containing names, addresses, phone numbers, and ratings of sexual partners. Laura was rated a 6 out of 10. Mem later informed me that someone had brought them clothes after I left, and they checked out the next morning wearing ill-fitting tracksuits. The man had also brought a spare key for Hendrik's car. Before returning to Leadville, I stopped by Hendrik's house and gave his wife his clothes, personal items, and copies of the photos Zeke and I had taken. Zeke's of them entering the motel holding hands, and mine of them undressing. None were explicit, but it was clear what was happening. She was particularly interested in the black book. I also handed her Laura's belongings and suggested she call Laura to pick them up, laughing as I left. A couple of hours later, as I drove back to Leadville, Laura called. "Jacob, you left me. Let's talk, and bring my bikes when you come." She clearly missed her bicycles, but I had already sold them. "Screw you," I replied, and hung up. Later, my boss hosted a Christmas party for everyone at the plant. I volunteered to bartend, as I knew the difference between gin and bourbon. The party was in full swing, and I only took one break to use the restroom. I was enjoying myself, like the other guests. One woman brought me a plate of food and told me to take a break. She sat at the bar with me, while the rest of the guests, about 40 people, mingled around the large basement. Some sat by the fireplace laughing, while others danced. We were the only ones not joining in, me eating and her watching. "My name is Diane Webster," she said. "I've been watching you, and you don't seem bothered about missing the main part of the party." I dried my hands and shook hers. "Jacob Wagner, and I'm probably having more fun here. You'd be surprised what people tell their bartender." She laughed. "I hear you work at the plant." "Yeah, and you?" "I'm an accountant and a neighbor, so I get invited to these parties." "Do they have parties often?" 3 or 4 times a year. They're usually fun and sometimes wild." "Is this one like that?" "No, Christmas is tamer. The 4th of July parties are big, though. I haven't worked with Jonathan long, but he seems like a great guy." "Oh, he and Amber are wonderful." I hadn't finished eating when a guest requested a drink, and Diane helped serve him. "Thanks," I said. "You've done this before." She laughed. "I've opened a few bottles." Jonathan and Amber Whitmore, our hosts, were great people. Jonathan had extensive knowledge of the plant, the mine, the quarry, and transportation. I was fortunate he took me under his wing, and I enjoyed working as his assistant. After I finished eating, another guest offered to take over bartending. "Take a break and dance with this lovely lady," he said, gesturing towards Diane. I handed him my towel, bowed to Diane, and she curtsied back. We laughed and danced, staying close for 3 songs. Afterward, I told her, "I should mention I'm married," and she stepped back. "Is she here?" "No, it's complicated, but I can explain quickly." "Go ahead." We grabbed our drinks and went upstairs to the office. She sat on the sofa and invited me to join her. "Okay, tell me about your marriage." I told her the whole story. When I got to the part about stealing their clothes, she burst out laughing. When she calmed down, she asked, "So, when's the divorce final?" "I filed after Thanksgiving, so it'll take a few months." "What's your story?" I asked. "Same as yours, except my husband didn't need a coach for his athletic accomplishments. He practiced regularly with waitresses at local bars. I never caught him, but in a small town, word gets around. That was a little over a year ago." "How do you feel about life after divorce?" I inquired. "It's still new. We divorced 5 months ago, but the problem is that many people think being divorced means I'm available." I laughed, but I also realized she wasn't someone I wanted to get involved with romantically. We talked until Amber Whitmore told us it was time to leave. I walked Diane to her house next door, and we said goodnight with a handshake. 2 days later, I asked my boss for Diane's phone number. I can't give it out without her permission, but I can give her yours, and she can decide. That was fine with me. 3 days later, she called. We talked for a long time, and she gave me her number. We spoke frequently, and our first date was 2 days before Christmas. We had dinner, danced a little, and I walked her home. She was spending Christmas with her family, and I was alone in my apartment. Around 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Day, my doorbell rang. It was Diane. "Would you like some company?" she asked. "I really would," I replied, and she came in carrying a small basket. She laid out turkey, ham, potatoes, and all the usual Christmas dishes. I told my parents you were probably alone and hungry, so my mom put this together for you. Thank her for me. It looks fantastic. We ate and talked the entire time, then cleaned up together. Later, we sat on my couch with eggnog, still talking. I learned her ex-husband worked at the best hardware store in town, and I realized I knew him from casual conversations at the store. They had been married for 3 years before divorcing. "He seemed like a nice guy," I said. "He is. We're still friends, but he cheats, and I can't tolerate cheaters. Can I ask something personal? Feel free to say it's none of my business." "Go ahead." "Your ex works at a hardware store, and you're an accountant. How do you afford to live near the Whitmores?" She smiled. "Thanks to my grandparents. They owned the land where this area was built. My house was the first one and was used as the model for the others. When everything was sold, they gave it to me." "Great-grandparents? Where do they live?" "They have a small ranch in Texas. They're actually at my parents' house for Christmas, and I just got back." It was past midnight when Diane decided to leave. I walked her to her car and saw about 10 inches of snow had fallen. I wasn't accustomed to such heavy snow and worried about her driving home, but she reassured me, having driven in these conditions all her life. "It's no big deal," she said. While we cleared the snow off her car, she added, "The plows don't come out until about 6 inches fall. I'll be fine." She put her hand on my shoulder, pulled me in for a kiss, and said, "Merry Christmas. I'll call you when I get home if you want." "I want you to," I said, kissing her back. It was our second date and our first kiss. Our third date was on New Year's Eve at her parents' party. She introduced me to her family, including her brother, sister, and their spouses. The party was bustling, and we didn't get much time together, so I grabbed a drink and socialized. Her grandparents had already returned to Texas, but about 50 people were there, including my boss and his wife. "Well, Jacob," Jonathan Whitmore said, "you must be doing something right to be invited here." "I think so too, Jonathan," I replied, and his wife added, "Call me Amber any time." I didn't see much of Diane, as she was busy helping her parents. When I tried to assist, I was told to enjoy the party. I did, thanks to the Whitmores. They introduced me to several prominent community members. A young woman named Rosita Cameron, or Rosie as she preferred, stuck by me, ensuring I had food and drinks. After an hour, I was ready to escape her clingy attention. I tried to stay near the Whitmores and other guests, but Rosie wouldn't leave me alone. I managed to hide for a bit in the restroom, but she was waiting for me when I emerged. Eventually, I told her I was leaving. I looked for Diane but couldn't find her, so I thanked her mother and said goodbye. Then I grabbed my coat and left. The next morning, as I made breakfast, my phone rang. It was Diane. "Happy New Year," I said. "How was the party?" "It was fine until Mom said you left." I got upset and the party went downhill. "Why did you leave without telling me?" "The main reason I left is a young lady named Rosita. She clung to me and wouldn't let go. Every time I saw you, you were busy hosting, pouring drinks, or serving snacks. I looked for you before leaving, but Rosita was still holding my hand, so I left to escape her." I sensed her mood lift a bit. "Oh my God, she's a good friend of mine, and I asked her to make sure no other woman got too close to you." "Well, she did her job well. Nobody came near me, but I didn't want her to scare you off. Anyway, Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too. It would have been better if you'd stayed. I'm making breakfast if you'd like to join me. I'd love to, but I'm watching the Rose Parade with my family. We chatted a bit and arranged to have dinner 3 days later. The day before our dinner, I called to confirm she could still make it. Sorry, Jacob. Something came up, she said, without offering to reschedule. That evening, I remembered I needed epoxy to fix a broken lamp, so I stopped by the hardware store. There, I overheard Diane's ex-husband, David Webster, talking to a customer. Yeah, she's coming back to me. Just a couple more dates, and we'll be back together. When she calmed down, she asked, So, when's the divorce final? I filed after Thanksgiving, so it'll take a few months. What's your story? I asked. Same as yours, except my husband didn't need a coach for his athletic accomplishments. He practiced regularly with waitresses at local bars. I never caught him, but in a small town, word gets around. That was a little over a year ago. How do you feel about life after the divorce? I inquired. It's still new. We divorced 5 months ago, but the problem is that many people think being divorced means I'm available. I laughed, but I realized she wasn't someone I wanted to get involved with romantically. We talked until Amber Whitmore told us it was time to leave. I walked Diane to her house next door, and we said goodnight with a handshake. 2 days later, I asked my boss for Diane's phone number. I can't give it out without her permission, but I can give her yours, and she can decide. That was fine with me. 3 days later, she called. We talked for a long time, and she gave me her number. We spoke frequently, and our first date was 2 days before Christmas. We had dinner, danced a little, and I walked her home. She was spending Christmas with her family, and I was alone in my apartment. Around 5:30 p.m. on Christmas Day, my doorbell rang. It was Diane. Would you like some company? She asked. I really would, I replied, and she came in with a small basket. She unpacked turkey, ham, potatoes, and all the traditional Christmas dishes. I told my parents you were probably alone and hungry, so my mom put this together for you. Thank her for me. It looks fantastic. We ate and talked for hours, then cleaned up together. Later we sat on my couch with eggnog, continuing our conversation. I learned her ex-husband worked at the best hardware store in town, and I realized I knew him from casual chats there. They were married for 3 years before divorcing. He seemed like a nice guy, I commented. He is. We're still friends, but he cheats, and I can't tolerate that. Can I ask something personal? Feel free to say it's none of my business. Go ahead. Your ex works at a hardware store, and you're an accountant. How can you afford to live near the Whitmores? She smiled. Thanks to my grandparents. They owned the land where this neighborhood was built. My house was the first one and served as the model for the others. When the development was sold, they gave me the house. Great-grandparents? Where do they live? They have a small ranch in Texas. They were at my parents' house for Christmas, and I just got back. It was past midnight when Diane left. I walked her to her car and saw about 10 inches of snow had accumulated. I wasn't used to so much snow and worried about her driving, but she reassured me, being a lifelong resident of the area. It's no big deal, she said, adding, the plows don't come out until we get at least 6 inches. I'll be fine as we brush the snow off her car. She put her hand on my shoulder, pulled me in for a kiss, and said, Merry Christmas. Call me when you get home if you want. I want you to, I replied, returning her kiss. It was our second date and our first kiss. Our third date was New Year's Eve at her parents' party. She introduced me to her family. The party was lively, and we didn't have much alone time. Her grandparents had returned to Texas, but about 50 people were present, including my boss and his wife. Well, Jacob, Jonathan Whitmore said, you must be doing something right to be invited here. I think so too, Jonathan, I replied, and Amber added, call me Amber any time. I didn't see much of Diane, as she was busy helping her parents. A young woman, Rosita Cameron, Rosie, monopolized my attention. After an hour, I wanted to escape. I tried staying near the Whitmores, but Rosie persisted. I hid in the restroom, but she waited for me. Finally, I excused myself, thanked Diane's mother, and left. The next morning, Diane called. "Happy New Year," I said. "How was the party?" "Fine until Mom said you left." I was upset. "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" "Because of Rosita. She wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I saw you, you were busy. I looked for you before I left, but Rosita was still clinging to me, so I just left." Her tone lightened. "Oh my gosh, she's a good friend. I asked her to keep other women away from you. She did a good job, but I didn't want her to scare you off. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. It would have been better if you had stayed. I'm making breakfast. Want to join me?" "I'd love to, but I'm watching the Rose Parade with my family." We chatted and arranged dinner for 3 days later. The day before, I called to confirm. "Sorry, Jacob, something came up," she said. "Not rescheduling." That evening, needing epoxy, I went to the hardware store. I overheard David Webster talking to a customer. "Yeah, she's coming back to me. Just a couple more dates." The customer wished him luck. Then David noticed me. "Hey, Jacob, need help?" "Just some epoxy." He chuckled. "We hardly sell the big cans." At checkout, I asked, "I heard you talking about dinner. Trying to get back with your ex?" "Not just any ex, my ex-wife. I messed up. Tomorrow's my birthday, and she agreed to dinner." He implied intimacy. "Does she want to get back together?" I asked. "Not sure, but we're friendly. Sometimes we have dinner, or spend the night." I got the hint. 2 days later, Diane called. "How are you?" "Not bad, and you?" "Good. So, your dinner with David went well?" "Yes." "How did you know?" "Does it matter?" "He thinks you're getting back together. A couple more nice nights, and everything will be fine," she quoted. "What do you mean by nice nights?" she asked, her tone serious. "Dinner, dancing, maybe a roll in bed for his birthday gift. He said you always gave him nice birthday gifts," and hinted at intimacy. "Jacob, that's not true." "Oh? How is it not true? Just talking?" "Yes, just talking. Pillow talk is always nice." There was a long pause. "Goodbye, Jacob." "Goodbye, Diane," I whispered. The next 2 weeks at work were a blur. We were behind schedule, short-staffed, and dealing with equipment failures. It kept me busy. At the end of the month, Jonathan and I had lunch. "What's going on with you and Diane? Amber said things were going well. Then you accused her of sleeping with David." I took a sip of coffee. "Here's the story," I explained. "So you didn't accuse her directly, but implied it? Just like Webster implied it to you. The problem is, she didn't deny it. She's a grown woman. She'll handle it," Jonathan said. "I hope so." The rest of lunch was about work. Jonathan wanted me to go to Atlanta to lobby headquarters for 2 more trucks. A month after my last conversation with Diane, I flew to Atlanta. I had also switched hardware stores. The takeoff from Denver was turbulent, but the flight smoothed out. In Atlanta, we got the trucks, not due to my efforts, but the data. Jonathan suggested I visit my parents on the way back, so I did. It was freezing in Leadville, but sunny and 20 degrees in my hometown. My parents picked me up, and we caught up. We avoided discussing Laura. My lawyer had called once about the divorce. Laura only wanted her bicycles, which I had sold. I called Zeke, and we met for drinks. He told me Laura and Hendrik were living in the old trailer. They were soliciting sponsors for her Ironman competition, even appearing on local TV. Zeke, Mem, and other friends made sure everyone knew Laura was still married to me, had cheated, and was living with her coach. Hendrik's wife even went on TV about retrieving their belongings from the motel, omitting who helped her. The motel got free publicity. Laura's only sponsor remained the gym, with minimal donations. There was a rumor about a terminated pregnancy, but it remained unconfirmed. The next day, my lawyer confirmed most of what I'd heard. Our trial was scheduled for April. "Will you attend?" he asked. "Probably not. No worries, I can handle it," concede. The next morning's flight to Denver was smooth. I picked up my truck and drove home. It was sunny but freezing in Leadville. Too late for the office, I went to a restaurant. I spotted Diane with a man, his back to me. I assumed it was David. We made brief eye contact. I bumped into someone in the apartment hallway, spun around, and retreated back inside. I nuked a meatloaf dinner and enjoyed a beer before turning in. The mountain wind howled outside. Gusts of 110 mph were common, blowing snow everywhere. My final thought before drifting off was how pleasant it would be to have someone to snuggle with. The following morning, my apartment was cozy, but the frost-covered windows revealed the frigid temperatures outside. I hoped to avoid the quarry that day. Later, I popped into Jonathan's office to update him on my trip, and he commended me on securing the 2 trucks. To be frank, I didn't think we'd land them, he remarked. You must have made quite the impact. Excellent work. Thanks, I responded, returning to my office to tackle some pending work. That evening I returned to the cafe. Diana or not, I craved a decent meal, and their coffee was top-notch. I ordered and cupped my hands around the warm mug. Mind if I join you? A recognizable voice inquired. Without glancing up, I replied, Aren't there any other open seats? Not one I prefer, she stated. Fine, I conceded. If this spot is so special, it's all yours. I gathered my coffee and coat, relocating to another table. When I looked back, Diana was exiting. Apparently, it wasn't that special after all. My coffee and food seemed less appealing after that. A few days later, Jonathan summoned me to his office. Have a seat, Jacob, he instructed. I complied, and he began, I'm in a bit of a predicament. Next week, the company president, 2 senior VPs, and their spouses are visiting. They'll be stopping here before skiing in Vail, and I'd like to host a party for them. As my assistant, you're invited, and since Diana is a close friend of my wife, she'll be there as well. Jonathan paused before adding, It would be preferable if both you and Diana brought guests. It would also be helpful if Diana's date was someone I knew. I understood where this was going. Are you following me? He asked. Yes, sir, I understand, I confirmed. Let me see what I can do. I'll invite Diana, and she might bring her former boyfriend. I've heard they're reconciling if they haven't already. I can go to the quarry and start working on one of the Cat 789s, which will definitely need attention by then. That should resolve your issue, correct? Jonathan grinned, shaking his head. You've impressed me since you started here with your ability to generate practical solutions quickly, but this is the first time you've made me believe you're less intelligent than a truckload of rocks. The party's at my place next Friday. Wear a suit and tie and bring a date. Now get back to work. Wear a suit and tie and bring a date. He was serious. The suit and tie were simple enough, but finding a date posed a significant hurdle. With only 10 days until the party, I barely knew any women in town, let alone anyone I felt comfortable inviting to a Whitmore party. I didn't even know who was single or available. Jonathan wasn't the only one in a difficult situation. Time passed quickly, and I still lacked a date. It was Saturday afternoon, and I was at my apartment. I opened the refrigerator to retrieve the bag of chili I'd thawed earlier. I enjoy chili and experimenting with different recipes, and this latest batch was excellent. I grabbed the chili and a beer, but noticed the fridge light was off and the motor silent. I opened and closed the door several times, but nothing happened. I inspected the electrical panel and discovered the fridge's breaker had tripped. I reset it, but it tripped again after several attempts. I put the beer and chili back in the fridge, donned my coat, and headed to the hardware store. There were 2 hardware stores in town, and I typically avoided David Webster's, but the other store was unexpectedly closed for a Saturday afternoon. Left with no other option, I went to Webster's. I located what I needed quickly and proceeded to the checkout, hoping to bypass Webster. Unfortunately, he was there, conversing with a man I recognized as Diana's father. I had briefly met him at a party, but hadn't interacted much. I primarily recognized him by his distinctive curled mustache, which he was quite proud of. He sang in a barbershop quartet, and all 4 members sported similar mustaches. I overheard their conversation. I thought everything was settled, but she stopped communicating with me, Webster lamented. She made the correct decision, Diana's father retorted. You don't deserve another opportunity. You made a mistake, and none of us, particularly Diana, believe you'd behave any differently if she gave you a second chance. But who is this fellow she's seeing? Nobody seems to know him, and no one has witnessed them together. He's from Leadville. It's none of your business, David. Just leave her be. They concluded the transaction, and after Diana's father reiterated, just leave her alone, he took his change and departed without a backward glance. Webster noticed me and smiled. Long time no see. How's it going? Not bad, I replied. It appears every time I visit you're discussing your personal affairs. Do you ever converse about anything else? He chuckled. It's a small town. There isn't much else to discuss. How's your personal life? Last time we spoke, you were attempting to win back your ex-wife. Not so good. She's involved with someone who has completely captivated her, but no one knows who he is or has seen them together, I admitted. I recalled seeing Diana with a man at the cafe. Maybe he's not from around here, I suggested. He has to be, Webster insisted, shaking his head. I finalized my purchase, returned home, replaced the circuit breaker, and felt a wave of relief as the fridge resumed its humming. I warmed the chili, enjoyed 2 beers, and gazed out at the falling snow, pondering the identity of Diana's new beau. We hadn't dated for long, just a few outings, but I liked her. The next day, Sunday, I was doing laundry at my building. My apartment building only had 4 units and no laundry room, so every Sunday, I hauled my clothes to the laundromat on Main Street. It was perpetually deserted when I went, and I often pondered how it remained in business. One advantage of going early was the easy parking, as the street stayed quiet until after church, when people swarmed the adjacent restaurant. It was still early, and mine was the sole vehicle parked outside. I was perusing the news on my phone when the laundromat door opened. I glanced up and saw Diana. I returned to my phone, but I could hear her approaching footsteps. She took a seat in the plastic chair beside me. We stared at each other for a few seconds before she spoke. I believe we can be of mutual assistance, she began. How so? I inquired. Jonathan and Amber are throwing a party on Friday. We're both invited, and I know they'd prefer we bring escorts. Why don't we put aside our differences for a few days and attend together? I considered her proposal for a moment. What about David? Aren't you two reconciling? Won't he be envious? Frankly, he's not really the type you'd bring to a function like this, if you understand my meaning, she replied. I listened, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for David. What do you mean? I pressed. David was your husband for 3 years, correct? You must have gone everywhere with him. He lived in the house you're currently in, and he attended the Whitmore parties with you. If he's not suitable to escort you to a party now, that's rather disheartening. I understand he was unfaithful, but he's making an effort to win you back. Perhaps this party is his opportunity to demonstrate he's changed. She gazed at me, her expression unreadable. Are you suggesting I should accompany David? She asked. I'm not certain, I responded, but it doesn't appear you intend to go with me. Without a word, she rose and walked out. As I watched her depart, I realized my foolishness. She had extended an olive branch, and I had stubbornly rebuffed her. That was incredibly stupid. I leaped up and followed her. Diana! Diana! Wait! She had already grasped the door handle, poised to exit, but she paused. I caught up to her. Well? She inquired. I stammered. Come on, Jacob, speak up. But it had better be worthwhile. I'm listening. I don't know the current state of your relationship with David, so if I'm overstepping, tell me. But here's what I've been thinking, I began, taking a deep breath. Laura cheated on me. David cheated on you. I have no desire to reconcile with Laura. She's content with her coach. But David seems keen to reunite with you. And after a few dates with you, I understand why. I find myself increasingly drawn to you. Then, when we agreed on a date, you canceled, claiming something came up. I let it slide, but I later discovered you were seeing your ex-husband. You told me you two were still amicable. I spoke with him, and he mentioned attempting to reconcile with you. He even insinuated, though never explicitly stated, that you'd spent some enjoyable evenings together, particularly on his birthday. Then yesterday, I overheard your father advising David to stay away because you have a new boyfriend. David didn't appear willing to concede. So now I'm caught in the middle, between your ex-husband, this new boyfriend, and the man I saw you with at the restaurant. You proposed we attend the party together, and I entertained the idea of building something meaningful, but I'm hesitant to compete, especially when I'm unsure of the rules with you. It feels as though there are no rules, so I'm at a loss. By the time I finished, we were back in the laundromat, seated on the plastic chairs. She took my hands in hers. "Did you genuinely mean it when you said you're increasingly drawn to me?" she asked. "Yes," I affirmed. "And if there were no ex-husband and no out-of-town boyfriend, would you accompany me to the party?" "With pleasure. What time will you pick me up, or should I meet you there?" "What do you mean?" I asked, perplexed. "I mean, I have absolutely no intention of reuniting with David. The 3 meetings we had post-divorce were strictly about the divorce. He attempted to persuade me to forfeit alimony, but I refused. I don't require his money, but he's obligated to pay until I remarry, should that ever occur. I canceled our date to make it clear to him that it was over. Nothing intimate has transpired between us since the divorce, regardless of what he may have implied. Honestly, I didn't even realize our last meeting coincided with his birthday. As for the out-of-town boyfriend, that's you, or was you, depending on your perspective. Any questions?" she added with a smile. "Only about 3 dozen, I replied. "You can start addressing them over dinner tonight. For now, your laundry is dry and ready to be folded." "Is 6:30 at my place all right?" "That's perfect," I said, still slightly bewildered. "Great. See you then," she said, rising. She kissed me, took a couple of steps, then returned and kissed me again, this time more lingeringly. "I really enjoy kissing you," she murmured, as she walked away. I watched her leave, astonished by the sudden shift in events and my own prior obliviousness. Why hadn't I spoken to her a month ago? Sometimes men can be incredibly foolish. That evening, dinner wasn't remarkable for the cuisine, but everything else was unforgettable and nearly perfect. It would have been ideal if the night had culminated in passionate intimacy, but it didn't. However, it concluded with very satisfying kisses. On Thursday, Jonathan inquired if I had secured a date for the party. I assured him that I had. "That's good, because I hear Diana has a date as well. But I expect you both to behave yourselves, understood?" "I think everything will be just fine," I responded with a grin. Friday night I parked in her driveway and walked to Jonathan and Amber's house. There were 2 limousines and several other cars were parked outside. I rang Diana's doorbell and grinned when she opened it. She invited me in while she retrieved her shawl. She was wearing that little black dress every woman owns, the one that makes them look breathtaking. "Wow," was all I could manage when I saw her. She smiled. When Jonathan opened the door for us, his eyes widened. Are you 2 together?" At that moment, Diana leaned over and kissed me. Jonathan looked at us both and said, "I'll take that as a yes," with a grin. I was pleased when Jonathan introduced me as his assistant to the 3 executives and their wives. The president even mentioned that I had persuaded them to approve the 2 new trucks. "Yes, sir," I replied. "But did you see the numbers?" After laughing and confirming that he had, we enjoyed a long, pleasant evening. The guests of honor departed by midnight, and Diana and I were the last to leave around 2 a.m. Eventually, Amber confessed to Jonathan that she knew Diana and I would arrive together, but wanted to see how anxious he would become. We all shared a good laugh. I walked Diana home, and since it was late, we kissed at her door, but she didn't invite me in. My lawyer called the next day to inform me that my divorce hearing with Laura was scheduled for April 7th. He asked if I planned to attend. Last time I said probably not. This time, I say yes. My relationship with Diana continued to blossom, though we hadn't rushed into anything physical. We were both content getting to know each other better. Then, the day of the divorce trial arrived. I sat beside my lawyer in the courtroom. Laura was absent, but her attorney was present. "Where is she?" the judge inquired. "In Wisconsin, Your Honor," her lawyer replied. "Why isn't she here?" "She's competing in an Ironman competition." "What's that?" the judge asked. Her lawyer explained the extreme endurance required for the competition and that she considered this more important than the hearing. The judge shook his head. "I can't answer that, Your Honor," the lawyer admitted. "I think I can," the judge replied. "Before I knew it, I was officially divorced. Laura received nothing but the money I had already left her. My lawyer shook my hand and told me that in a few weeks I would be officially single. I spent some time with my family, and during that visit, we heard on the local news that Laura had been disqualified from the Ironman in Wisconsin. She had completed the swim portion, but had gotten into an altercation with an official over an equipment issue. Apparently, during the swim-to-bike transition, Laura, who placed 297th out of 1,300 participants, dropped her towel. Her coach, Jason Hendricks, handed it to her, and she was disqualified for receiving outside assistance, a violation of the rules. This enraged Laura, and she physically assaulted Hendricks, blaming him for the disqualification. She was arrested and detained in Wisconsin, awaiting trial. Jason Hendricks was banned for life from all Ironman competitions, and his coaching license was revoked. To make matters worse, Laura's bicycle was found to have damaged gears, something else she blamed on Hendricks. When I heard the news, I laughed until I nearly cried. 2 years of training, a divorce, an affair, and rumors of pregnancy termination had culminated in her disqualification in the first stage of her major competition. All that preparation, and it ended in chaos. Her beloved bicycle was now useless to her. Snowstorms pounded the roads as I drove back to Leadville from the Denver airport. Diana and I had stayed in touch while I was away, so she knew about the divorce and Laura's disqualification. When I finally pulled up to my house and grabbed my bag, Diana suddenly jumped on me. After a flurry of kisses, she practically dragged me to my front door, helping me open it. We both stumbled into the living room, and she began undressing me. At first, I thought she was simply assisting me out of my winter clothes, but she continued. Hey, hold on a second. Let me catch my breath," I said, laughing. "No chance, mister," she teased. "You're divorced now, and I'm going to have you until I lose my breath." I stopped her, pulling her into a tight hug so she couldn't move. "I'm looking forward to this part. But what does having me until you lose your breath even mean?" She laughed. "I don't know. It just came out, I guess. It means I can ravish you now that you're single." "Well, that clarifies things," I said, helping her finish undressing me. Then I started undressing her. We didn't remain clothed for long. Soon, we were both naked in my bed. That initial encounter wasn't about affection or romance. It was pure, raw desire, the kind that arises between two people who have been deprived of intimacy for a long time and were eager to break their celibacy. The following day, we both barely made it to work. Diana had stayed the night, and when we left for work, we were still getting dressed. We spent most of the day talking on the phone, trying to arrange another rendezvous later. She had a meeting she couldn't miss, or we would have had a mid-afternoon tryst at my apartment. Though we couldn't manage it during the day, we definitely made up for it in the evening. I gave her a key to my apartment, and when I arrived home, she was already there, fresh from the shower. I've never showered faster in my life. I jumped into bed with her, and our lovemaking that night was different. We took our time, explored each other, and savored every moment. I studied every inch of her body, learning how to make her smile and moan simultaneously. I also discovered how to make her scream and laugh at the same time. It felt like mastering the art of... The 5th century BC Chinese strategist Sun Tzu penned The Art of War on Military Tactics. After a week with Diana, my comprehension of love had undergone a metamorphosis. Mentally, I began composing a book titled The Art of Love, entirely devoted to her. The physical connection was extraordinary, but it transcended mere intimacy. I cherished gazing at her, caressing her, kissing her, and simply being near her. I could always sense her presence. My parents used to remark that our dog, Baron, could sense when I was coming home. He would sit by the window, tail wagging, then dash from door to door, anticipating my entrance. I felt similarly about Diana. When she was close, my heart would race, and a smile would involuntarily grace my lips. Closeness can be described but the accompanying sensations defy articulation. A year after our initial night together, we married. It was a splendid, clear, warm mountain day, a stark contrast to the tempestuous weather of the previous year. Mountain weather was unpredictable, but that day, everything was flawless. My family attended the wedding, and just before the ceremony, my father pulled me aside. "Curious about what became of Laura?" he asked. "Not particularly, but I'm sure you'll tell me regardless," I replied. "Well, you're aware of the Wisconsin incident, right? That she assaulted Hendricks?" "Yeah, I heard she was imprisoned for 6 months because of it. When she was released, she returned to town, but nobody wanted anything to do with her, not even Hendricks. He's still at the gym, but as a regular trainer now, not an Ironman coach. Laura went back to her old job. She's proficient with computers. She's abandoned training, except for the annual hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July. She's probably gained 25 pounds, he added with a chuckle. The world had fallen into place. I was about to marry the love of my life, and all the prior turmoil had subsided. Diana and I would occasionally encounter her ex-husband, David Webster, around town, but we never engaged with him. Nearly a year into our marriage, I needed to visit a hardware store. By then, a large chain store had opened, offering lower prices than the local establishments, which had subsequently been forced to close. I needed new belts for my sander, so I went to the chain store. While selecting the belts, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw David Webster. "Hello, stranger," he said. "Hi," I replied. "How are you?" "Not bad," he answered, sporting a vest with the store's logo. "Do you work here now?" I inquired. "Yeah, this is the only game in town. The pay is decent and the benefits are excellent." "Well, I have what I need, so I'll be going," I said, preparing to depart. He touched my hand to stop me. "I want you to know you did me a favor," he said. "Is that so?" "Yeah, I don't have to pay alimony anymore," he chuckled, finding it amusing. I simply smiled politely and walked away, thinking to myself, yeah, but now I get the birthday presents. As life progressed, Diana and I settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as respiration. Our days were filled with simple joys, weekend excursions to the mountains, quiet dinners at home, and shared laughter over inside jokes only we understood. The chaos of the past seemed like a distant memory, one that had lost its sting and faded into something I could finally release. Every so often, I would catch a glimpse of Laura around town. She'd pass by on the street, or I'd spot her in line at the grocery store. Her once fierce determination now seemed softened into something unrecognizable. Hendricks was a shadow of his former self, too. They had become part of the town's folklore, a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry, of priorities twisted beyond repair. People gossiped about them occasionally, but nobody truly cared anymore. Their drama had fizzled out long ago. As for Diana and me, we had built something impervious to the past. Our love wasn't about grand pronouncements or pyrotechnics. It was about trust, about showing up for each other every day in the small, quiet moments that constituted a life together, the kind of love that deepens with time without needing validation from anyone but ourselves. I often reflected on how fortunate I was, how close I had come to letting it all slip away. There were moments, fleeting but real, when I almost allowed pride, fear, or doubt to obstruct what was right in front of me. But ultimately, Diana and I chose each other, repeatedly, in the ways that truly mattered. Our life wasn't perfect. No life ever is. We had our share of disagreements and misunderstandings, but we always found our way back, because that's what love is, isn't it? It's not about the absence of problems. It's about confronting them together, standing side by side, even when things become challenging. Especially when things become challenging. Now, as I sit here writing this, reflecting on everything that has transpired, I've realized something significant. It's not about how you begin, or even how you conclude. It's about the middle, the messy, complicated, beautiful middle, where all the genuine living occurs. And in that middle, I discovered everything I had ever sought. Diana and I have weathered enough storms to know that we can face whatever lies ahead. We don't possess all the answers, but we have each other, and in the end, that's more than sufficient. As for Laura, Hendricks, David, and all the others who crossed our paths, their stories are their own now, just as mine is mine. But as far as I'm concerned, This chapter of my life, this part where I finally found peace, love, and the simple joy of awakening next to someone who enhances every day, is the only story that truly matters. And I eagerly anticipate what comes next.